Everdark, Episode 92. The show has just begun. Last on Everdark, Balthazar was surrounded by kittens as the vampires discussed what to do about Kali, but more importantly, what to do in the future, namely whether vampires should take a more active role in human affairs. And then the crowds arrived. Are they here for Daemon or Balthazar? The vehicles and crowds of people stretched down the block and out of sight. Headlamps flared like golden torches. There were as many vampires outside of the cars as there were in them. They streamed down the road, hundreds of them, close to 1,000, and more were coming. This would surely be noticed by the humans. Daemon was about to reach out and block the humans from noticing this, but he stopped when he realized that had already been done. Daemon felt dozens of powerful Iros minds reaching out and stopping those in the houses along the way from noticing them. "Stay in your houses," they said. "There is nothing to see here. Stay in your houses. Go to sleep. There is nothing to hold your interest outside your doors and windows." "They are keeping their presence hidden, Iros," Daemon said. "Of course. They are Iros. They're intelligent. Well, most of them are," Balthazar answered. This crowd of vampires reminded Daemon of some of the rallies he'd had in Nightvallen. Pleasurable, potent memories of his people reaching out for him, crying his name, falling to their knees with adoration. He had earned that adoration back then. He had kept them safe, the peace intact, and all had looked positive for the future, except for his lack of a fledgling. That had tainted everything for him. But they had been genuinely grateful. He would make sure they were again with Julian by his side. But this crowd was there to see Balthazar first and him second. He was glad to cede the spotlight to his best friend. Balthazar needed some love and recognition and maybe even revenge. He and his battle cat, Mephi. The black kitten easily rode Balthazar's shoulder as if both of them had been doing this for years instead of moments. Balthazar reached up and scratched between Mephi's ears and kissed his nose. "I will have to keep treats in a pocket for Mephi," Balthazar murmured with a frown as Mephi meowed piteously for attention and, evidently, food. "Where is the being who hates cats?" Daemon chuckled. "I have no idea. Did I really hate cats back in the day?" Balthazar asked. "Only because you were afraid to love them. But you aren't afraid anymore, I think," Daemon answered. Balthazar looked up at him, a touch of surprise on his face. "So I may have gone further than my former self in one way?" "Yes, I believe you have." Daemon reached up and tickled Mephi under his furry chin. "He very much likes to be scratched on the ruff in front," Balthazar informed him, and Daemon obliged. The crowd surged against the wrought iron fence as he and Balthazar neared them. There were two burly members of House Ravenscroft on either side of the large gate. They were gazing at the crowds with narrowed eyes. They were a little jumpy. Balthazar sent a wave of calmness out to his people and to the crowd. Everyone settled, but Balthazar still didn't look at them. "Are you ignoring the crowd, or is Mephi really in such distress that they do not deserve your attention, Iros?" Daemon asked dryly. As they stopped at the wrought iron gate, there were rows upon rows of faces looking at them both with a sense of awe. They were strangely silent, or perhaps not, as they were Iros bloodline and thoughts were just as effective as voices. Luminous silver eyes were all fixed on them. Daemon met their gazes, which quickly dropped, while Balthazar studiously continued to look at Mephi. "Oh, maybe a little of column A and a little of column B," Balthazar murmured. "I did not expect you to have stage fright. Or are you just being shy all of a sudden?" Daemon's lips were threatening to break into a grin. "I am just building anticipation," Balthazar murmured. "Let us see what anticipation they are feeling." The Vampire King opened his mind more fully to the crowd that waited so patiently beyond the gates. He did not bother reading individual thoughts. That way lay madness. What he did was look for themes, and he found them. "Is that him? Daemon?" It must be. He's tall, dark, and handsome, but there's something about him that's not human, not vampire. You can tell he's not from around here. What does he intend to do? Rule us? Kill us? We could rule the world with him. We would be safe. Are we food to him? If he's here and Iros is here, then what about the other immortals? We're not alone. We are not alone. We are not alone. They like you, Balthazar murmured. Yes, of course. I am king, Daemon reminded him. Balthazar snorted. You use that phrase to mean so many things. Actually, it incorporates many meanings, all in one, Daemon pointed out. So it's shorthand. Balthazar raised his eyebrow. In a manner of speaking. Now, let us see what they're thinking about you. Daemon swept his mind out again. Balthazar killed Roan Tithe. We should have known then that he wasn't a normal vampire. Is that really Iros? Balthazar was always so arrogant, believing himself to be something special when he isn't. We exiled him. An immortal. What is he going to do to us? If Iros is close to King Daemon, does that mean our bloodline will be above all others? Balthazar was always friendly to me. Surely he'll remember how I didn't turn away from him when he was exiled, right? Right? The Councilor, the leaders of the vampires. That must be made clear to Balthazar and this King Daemon. The last thought came from a man that was making his way through the crowd from an elegant vehicle that looked less like a coffin than the others. He was middle-aged looking in human years, with frost at his temples and thick, dark hair swept back from a high forehead. An aquiline nose was framed by two deep-set, piercing silver eyes. People moved aside for him because of his rank and age, not to mention the line of old, powerful vampires that acted as his personal guard. His name was Martin Devenus. He was over 1,000 years old and an Iros. He was also a high-ranking member of the council, and he thought he was in charge. Daemon smiled. This was going to be fun. Were you waiting for him, Iros? Daemon asked Balthazar. Oh, I knew he'd show up at some point. I knew him, well, from before, Balthazar replied dryly. During the trial for the killing of Roan Tithe, he made a speech. Was it a good speech? It was a brilliant speech, Balthazar chuckled dryly. While he felt it was terrible about the fact that Roan Tithe had essentially tortured all of us for centuries, the rule of law demanded that I be punished to the severest extent that it allowed. Oh, and he managed to mention how he was of the Iros bloodline too, and that it pained him to do this, but I was no good and needed to be put down like the dog I was. I cannot wait to see what happens next. Are you going to sick Mephi on him? Daemon asked. Balthazar smirked. I wouldn't soil Mephi's claws. Councilor Devenus had made it to the front of the line. His personal guard had pushed people out of the way. Though they hissed and bared teeth at the guards, their cold looks in response had these younger vampires standing down, though they still glowered angrily. Councilor Devenus stood in front of the gates. His personal guard made sure there was 5 feet of space around him in all directions. Those piercing silver eyes swept from him to Balthazar, and they found both of them wanting. As to him, the Councilor Devenus thought, at least he looks the part of the king, even if he is undoubtedly a fraud. As to Balthazar, Councilor Devenus thought, trouble, always in the middle of it. I should have known that exiling him wouldn't put a stop to this. Didn't I say he needed to be handed his second death? Well, now is the time for it. The crowd, which had been silent before, was now moving restlessly. There were looks of sheer hatred shot at Councilor Devenus. His personal guards found this alarming. The people should show respect to the councillor. They had always done so before, but now the crowd seemed almost ready to attack one of their leaders, one of their betters, when they should have been seeking Councilor Devenus's favor. That is the start of a revolution, Daemon thought. Martin, how not a pleasure to see you again, Balthazar finally said with one of his pained yet bright smiles. Is that a cat on your shoulder? Councilor Devenus frowned at Mephi as he finally noticed the animal. Mephi meowed at him imperiously. Balthazar scratched Mephi between the ears. Yes, it is. Now, Martin, I really thought I wouldn't see you darken my door again, Balthazar said, continuing to smile. Are we on a first-name basis now, Balthazar? Or should I say, Iros? Councilor Devanus asked with a faint smile as if it were an in-joke between them. While we share the intimacy of you calling for my second death, you do not have the right to call me by my first name. And the non-bowing rule certainly doesn't apply to you, Balthazar said as he tipped his head towards Daemon. You should bow to our king, Martin. Without even looking at Daemon, Councilor Devanus stated, The council has not yet ascertained if King Daemon has in fact returned. This person could be anyone, and I am more than certain that he is a fraud. Balthazar turned to Daemon. It looks like you're imaginary until the council says you're not. Amazing how much power they have now, isn't it? Daemon just smiled thinly. I thought Daemon was in charge and the council just rubber-stamped his proclamations. Well, the preceptor really is in charge, but since we imprisoned him in Solace's dungeon, the council must have got all excited that they could step up and fill the void, Balthazar explained with an amused bark of laughter at the end. Oh, Daemon will be displeased. Not that he can do anything about it. He does have bigger problems than an uppity council. It actually appears they are our problems. I see. Daemon nodded. The council has always been in charge, Councilor Devanus stated. I pulled what I said before from your mind, Martin, so please, lying is embarrassing for you, me, for all of us here. Balthazar narrowed his eyes at the man. Councilor Devanus rolled his shoulders and tugged at the collar of his fine dark suit, but said nothing. You're all a part of my bloodline, but not all of you are made equal. And your mental shields, Martin, are pathetic, by the way. Even if they were good, it wouldn't have kept me out, but still, you should work on those. Sloppy is as sloppy does.
Original work is harder and harder to find in a world full of reactions, commentary, plagiarism, and generic chat GPT content. And I'm really glad you found us. Every word of the story is from me, typed into my laptop while sitting on my couch. And a real person spoke every word into a microphone as well, not an AI voice. I got into producing stories because I care about entertaining you, the human who's listening to this right now. And while we certainly could have had a bot army to listen to episodes, leave realistic comments, and make us look really popular, it just wouldn't be satisfying. I'm glad you're with me for this story, and I would love it if you left a comment just to say hello.
There was a smattering of laughter among the Iros. Councilor Devanus was not a fan favorite. His personal guards stiffened. Again, this lack of respect was growing, not lessening as their master spoke. Councilor Devanus grimaced, but remained ramrod straight, as if the laughter did not bother him at all, which, of course, it did. Hugely. He was thin-skinned, and Daemon had no doubt that he would have one of his guards harm one of the crowd of Iros to make a point. Not that he would allow that. But it was part of this man's character. He is not used to being laughed at, Daemon remarked. Not to his face, he isn't, Balthazar said with a snort. The people feel they can risk it now that the immortal Iros is here to lead them. Daemon said, you should listen more closely to their thoughts, my king, because they are talking more about you. Balthazar gave him an arch look. They are talking about us. Daemon compromised, though he still thought that he was right. In any event, Balthazar, Councilor Devanus continued using Iros's given name, I am here to meet this alleged king of ours and examine him. As to your own claims of being Iros, are you actually claiming to be an immortal? The way Councilor Devanus said the last was meant to bear the ultimate insult. As if Balthazar could not be so foolish as to be claiming what could absolutely not be true. Daemon's fangs emerged. Balthazar felt the anger on his behalf bloom in Daemon's chest, and made a little wave to show him he did not care. He's a bastard. He can't help it, my king, Balthazar said. Should I do to him what I did to those who opposed us in solace? Daemon asked. There was a stirring in the crowd. The news about that had already spread far and wide, as Daemon had known it would. But he also knew that there would need to be more demonstrations before his rule was unquestioned again. So this fool Councilor Devonus could be of some use. Balthazar stroked his chin as he regarded Councilor Devonus speculatively. Well, while Armageddon was absolutely spectacular and devastating, I do love when you use the other gifts. Simply turning this windbag mortal again isn't as spectacular as all that you can do. Not that you shouldn't take away his immortality later, but for now, I'm leaning towards other gifts. Are you claiming that he can take our immortality away? Councilor Devonus scoffed, placing one beringed hand against his chest. He had plump hands that had never worked. Daemon knew from a bare scraping of his memories. He had been a rich man who had been turned because he had land and influence that would be useful to the vampires. Now, because he had managed to stay alive and out of harm's way for long enough, he acted as if he were entitled to be running things. I claim nothing, Daemon answered. Councilor Devonus blinked in confusion, but then smiled fulsomely. So you are not claiming I do things. I do not claim to do things. And the gift that I allowed the other immortals to give you, I can take away. Daemon answered simply, his voice darkening as he drew power into him. Oh, you're going to do it. You're going to use the other powers. Oh, I so love this. Balthazar let out a bark of laughter. Daemon smiled genuinely at him. I will let you have some fun as well, Iris, but... No, I am glad to let you go first. Balthazar gestured towards the gate as if ceding the stage. Gentlemen, this is quite the show you are putting on, Councilor Devonus said dryly. On the contrary, Martin, Balthazar chuckled. The show has just begun. Councilor Devonus frowned and waved at the crowd. I think that a discussion away from all this rabble would be more appropriate. That was as far as Councilor Devonus got. Using the power of the Ashir, Daemon levitated himself 6 feet into the air. His hands lifted from his sides, and the gates opened wide of their own accord. The 2 House Ravenscroft guards drew back and tensed, as they expected everyone to rush in. But with a mental command from Balthazar, all stayed behind the gate. He was not using the gift against Councilor Devonus, though. I want him to have a close-up view, Balthazar explained. So, you are of the Ashir bloodline, Daemon, or whatever your true name is, Councilor Devonus stated, looking a little paler, but still confident this was all a fraud. Lightning streaked across the sky as Daemon had storm clouds cover all but a sliver of the moon. That silvery light landed upon him. He was wreathed in ghostly radiance.
Horus! Horus's gift to control the weather, too!
Someone shouted. Daemon allowed the lightning to streak through the deep clouds so it made it seem as if the very sky was on fire. Oh, good show! This is excellent, Balthazar clapped. I've never seen a Horus do this so well. The gate could have been opened by remote control, and the clouds could be a coincidence. Councilor Devonus cried out to the crowd. Daemon pointed towards a far hill. All of the crowd turned towards it. He sent a lightning bolt streaking out of the sky to hit it. Even at this distance, they saw the earth erupt in a geyser, some of it becoming molten before it fell back down.
Oh my God!
Is he a god? I've never seen a Horus do as much as that.
It's Daemon! It's Daemon!
Councilor Devonus strode onto House Ravenscroft's lands even as the rest of the crowd hung back. Daemon's mouth tightened at this affront. Balthazar had a half-bemused expression on his face. He had expected nothing less. Councilor Devonus stood before Daemon, hands on his hips, mouth set into a thin line of dislike and disbelief. He was not impressed. My goodness, the old goat is truly in denial, Balthazar mused. I have seen many things in my years. A few special effects. Do not fool me, you fraud, Councilor Devonus stated calmly. No, Councilor Devonus. You simply are a fool who cannot see the truth. Daemon allowed his mind voice to boom into all of their minds, including the councillors. "He has the power of Iros too," another called out in exultation. "He's one of us as well." "Balthazar could be doing that," Councilor Devonus shouted, his face purpled with rage that people could be so easily gulled. His mind flared with the injustice of it. Daemon could see his frustrations over the years. The Order had always been a scam, but vampires were just as credulous as humans, and it had been useful to keep most of them cowed and docile. Councillor Devonus had never believed himself, which was why he didn't think Daemon or Iros were actually real, no matter what he was seeing at the moment. The vampires' origins were more lost than their human counterparts were, but the past didn't matter. Only the future did. And now that the Order had been routed, no matter by who, the Council could finally take its rightful place as the true rulers of vampire kind. But Daemon and Balthazar were getting in the way of that. He would do anything to stop this. "Martin, you really shouldn't have said that to him. He's been quite patient with all of us non-believers so far, but I don't think you should ask for more of a dog and pony show," Balthazar warned as he motioned his people away from him and the Councillor. Balthazar was already keeping the personal guard outside and away from harm. Daemon leaned his head back, fangs out, and let his form ripple. Not wolves this time. No, something that flew. He thought of Julian, and immediately he transformed into a murder of crows, black shiny wings, brilliant glittering eyes, sharp beaks. He was 100 strong. There were gasps of amazement, both external and internal. The Iros believed. Councillor Devonus staggered back as Daemon had the crows fly as one. He circled Ravenscroft Manor, then he flew over the heads of the crowd. The crows showed him hundreds of images that he formed into one view. The Iros reached up for him as if to brush their fingers against his wings. "It's Daemon. It's King Daemon. He's returned. Our king has returned. We're saved. We are transformed. He will kill us all for what we've done," a small voice whispered through the crowd. "Ah, Kali followers," Daemon realized, and marked the people whose voices echoed that for later. Then he swept back to Councillor Devonus, and he dive-bombed the vampire. His personal guard stood dumbly, unable to move or react in any way as Balthazar held these vampires, who were 3 times his age. Daemon was not the only one who noticed this. The crowd of Iros did too. They knew the skill he was showing. Councillor Devonus crouched low as the ground as his beaks pecked at the vampire's flesh, leaving hundreds of cuts that would not heal until he allowed them to. He transformed once more into his humanoid form. The wings of the birds became feathered rather than his fur coat. He gracefully sank down onto his haunches in front of the quivering Councillor Devonus. He put his fingers under the man's bleeding chin and forcefully lifted his head until they were eye to eye. Councillor Devonus was shaking. The truth was in his eyes. The fool would be affronted later, but for now, he was just afraid. Daemon used the mirror's gift to show Councillor Devonus just how pathetic he looked at that moment. The councillor gasped and tried to draw back from his own battered and bloody visage, but Balthazar had a hold of his mind and kept him there. He walked up behind Daemon to look down at Councillor Devonus. "There was a time," Balthazar said softly, "when I wanted his regard, my king. I hope you can forgive me for that shortcoming. You wished to be a part of vampire society, Iros. You need to apologize for nothing, my friend," Daemon said just as softly, but all heard. And then Daemon used Armageddon to take Councillor Devonus's immortality away. There was just a rushing wind through the trees for a moment to note its occurrence, but the change in the scent of his blood told everyone in that crowd what they needed to know. Councillor Devonus was now human. "Bring his former guards over, Iros," Daemon requested as he shifted back to his own form. The personal guards frog-marched over to them like little tin soldiers all in a line. "You will take Martin back to the other councillors," Daemon told them, his voice even and low. You will tell them that this is what awaits them if they go up against me. If they wish to join us, they will act with respect to myself and Iros, or they will find me less than hospitable." Balthazar let out a laugh. "Oh, this is so much better than I imagined, my king." Mephi let out a satisfied meow. Join us next time for episode 93, On Your Knees.
If you want to support this podcast and get the unedited episodes, we actually have something better than a Patreon. I have my own serial subscription website, wraithrain.com. It's an old-fashioned paywall site, just like Netflix or Crunchyroll. With a membership, you do get the uncut versions of Everdark with no intros, outros, or edited parts. Just the chapters as they were meant to be heard before we've had to make it all Disney safe. If this sounds interesting to you, try us out for a month. The link to sign up is in the notes. The most you'll pay is $9.95 a month, and you'll be directly supporting us, real people, not big corporations like Amazon or Netflix, not content created with AI. Wraithrain is a small team of actual humans doing the best we can to transport you with romantic action and adventure stories. We really thank you for your support.